Okay, so to start off this second question, or this first question from the second section of 2.3, HL 2.3, we're going to look at just this part first, the division part. And I'm going to go ahead and start with an explanation of the division formula so that hopefully it makes sense to you. So first, just looking at division, we would have, let's call Z1, just in broad terms, we'll do A plus B over C plus D. Now, the thing that we have to do is to rationalize the denominator because we have these imaginary numbers that we need to get rid of in the denominator. So we're going to multiply by the conjugate, which is C minus DI. And if we multiply it on the bottom, we have to multiply it on the top. I apologize in advance too, I don't have my stylus, so this is going to be a little bit messier. So on the top, we're left with AC minus ADI plus BCI minus BDI squared. All of this is going to be divided by C squared minus CDI plus CDI minus D squared I squared. So in the denominator, like the part that I'm trying to get at is in the denominator, this here cancels out because they are opposite. So this goes away. Once that goes away, I squared is the same thing as the square root of -1 squared, which means just times -1. So if you multiply negative D squared times -1, that changes the sign and changes this to a positive, and the I squared goes away. So in the denominator, we're just left with C squared plus D squared. Now this is where you can either remember that the denominator just becomes C squared plus D squared, or you can, the other way that it's written in our division formula is it's written as the modulus of Z3 squared, which would be the modulus of Z3 is the square root. Remember, this is the distance formula. So C squared plus D squared squared, and those just cancel out. So you're just left with C squared plus D squared. So whichever way helps you remember it, either way works, either way is fine. But now that we've walked through that, now let's plug in some of our numbers. Okay, so this is just that yellow box again. So our first step, since I've walked through it ambiguously, I'm just gonna jump through it. I know I have to multiply the numerator by the conjugate, the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate. So this is -2 minus 3i on the top and bottom, which I know I'm gonna have to FOIL out on the top, which I'll do now, is -2 minus 3i minus 2i, and then minus 3 times I squared, which makes that a positive 3. And then on the bottom, I'm going to jump ahead. I'm just going to make sure I know that it's C squared plus D squared. So that would be 4, which is -2 squared. And then D squared is the 3 squared, so plus 9. Okay, so I know that that simplifies to be 1 minus 5i divided by 13. Now that's just the yellow box, but I also have that Z2 divided by 5 term. So if I'm subtracting two fractions, that means I know I need to have a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this one by 13 over 13, and I'm going to multiply this one by 5 over 5. Okay, so when I multiply all of that out, I end up getting 5 minus 25i, And this one, I'm going to go ahead and distribute the negative to each term just to make this easier. So this is going to be minus 39, and I have to distribute the negative. So this becomes plus 26i, and all of this, our common denominator is 65. And then I'm going to simplify the numerator. So I end up with negative 34 over 65, plus I over 65. And that's our final answer right there. So that was our first look at division. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to number 4 in the second section. So I will do that now. So all of these are related. D might be a little bit more difficult, but I really don't think so. It follows the same premise. Part B is just one extra step. Once you cross multiply, it should look exactly like this problem. And after you do see this one, part A should be super easy. For this one, the first thing I'm going to do is FOIL just like normal. So I have 2z plus 4i plus zi, and then plus 2i squared, which is the same thing as minus 2. And this is going to be equal to z minus 1 plus I minus zi. And so since I know that I'm solving for z, I'm going to get all of my z terms to one side of the equation. So I'm going to move everything with a z to the left. So when I subtract, I'll subtract z, and I will add zi to both sides. So that's the first step. And I will also be moving everything that doesn't have a z to the other side. So we have minus 4i, and we have plus 2 to both sides. Okay, so from there, now I am just going to simplify. So I'm left with z, this cancels, plus 2zi, this cancels, equals, this cancels, and then, oh, sorry, I didn't finish writing, minus 4i plus 2, so this becomes 1 minus 3i, and then this cancels. Okay, so from here, I'm still trying to solve for z. Now, what I notice about the left-hand side is that there is a z in both terms, so I'm going to factor it out. So this left-hand side becomes z, 1 plus 2i. Maybe y'all see where this is going, I hope so. 1 minus 3i. So now, in order to separate these two, I'm going to divide, and I end up with z equals 1 minus 3i divided by 1 plus 2i. And so from here, now I can use my division of two complex numbers to result in one complex number. So I will do this one again with you just so you make sure that you get the practice. So I'm going to multiply by the conjugate on the top and bottom. Oh, sorry, conjugate, 1 minus 2i. Okay, and when I do that, I'm going to FOIL out my top. I get 1 minus 3i minus 2i, and then this becomes minus 6 because it's positive 6i squared, but I squared is negative 1, so that changes the sign back to a negative 1. My denominator is c squared plus d squared, which is 1 plus 4. Okay, so I'm going to simplify. I end up with negative 5 minus 5i over 5, which then lastly simplifies to, I'm going to switch it up on you guys, I apologize, but negative 1 minus I. That's your final answer. Negative 1 minus I. Okay. So that should be pretty straightforward. That should help you answer the rest of the questions. If you still have questions remaining after that, keep in mind your homework is to look at all of these problems and also to look at your review. but hopefully that's enough to get you going on your test.